Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Shake Sales. I'm your host, Maggie Blume, the sales evangelist at Mailshake. And today we are talking with Gabrielle Blackwell, GB, and she's the sales development manager over at Culture Amp. And she also is the writer, creator for a newsletter called The One-on-One. And that's how we're going to base this whole conversation today. So for managers listening out there, sales managers specifically, we're going to help you level up your one-on-one, get it better than it was yesterday for your reps so you can give, them a bit more guidance too. So Gabrielle, thank you so much for being on here today. Before we dive in, do you mind taking some time to introduce yourself?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me here, Maggie. But yes, everyone, my name is Gabrielle or GB, sales development manager at Culture Amp. I've been doing the SDR manager job for a very long time now, I think like 5 or 6 years. And then as Maggie mentioned, have a weekly newsletter that goes out every Thursday called The One-on-One. It is my labor of love. So I definitely subscribe, tune in, tell a friend to tell a friend.
Amazing. I love that too. Labor of love. I feel like everyone's used to saying passion project or side project, but yeah, still labor in it, still something you love doing. And before we were talking today, GB, like I was telling you, I've been on one-on-ones with managers where I'm like, what am I doing here? Or can we change this to every other week instead of every single week? Because there's no point of me jumping on here. And I'm not putting the blame on managers. They have a lot going on in their days too. And I've never been in that management position to know of all of those nuances that happen. So that's exactly, what we want to talk about today. And I want to start out the conversation of like, where do you feel like managers typically get one-on-ones wrong?
Yes. So there's this one stat that I'm going to always bring up in every conversation regarding managers. And it's this, which is, the average age of first-time managers is 30 years old. The average age that a manager goes through their first management training is 42 years old. So when it's a 12-year gap. So when I think about hearing an experience like you've had, I think I've definitely had those experiences of going into one-on-ones and I'm like, what are we doing exactly? Are we just kind of catching up? Like what's happening? Basically, what are my expectations? As a manager, I've also asked myself that question of, all right, I'm going to go into a one-on-one and I don't really know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. The only point of reference that I have is past examples of one-on-ones that I've been through as a rep and recognizing that not every single manager is going to show up with every single person the same way. Like if I'm not actually seeing the diversity of ways that you can have a successful one-on-one, then I as a manager am probably not going to be in a position to deliver really great one-on-one. So I think there's a big breakdown probably because people just aren't aware of what a really great one-on-one should be. They're not being shared or they're not being made aware of what the expectations are of a one-on-one and what it looks like and what you need to do to actually have a really great one-on-one. And so what ends up happening is like your example. And again, I've definitely had reps who've done that. They're like, hey, actually, I don't want to do our one-on-one today. And I was like, I don't blame them. I was like, I don't really know I just don't know what they can get from me. So, so I think that the breakdown really, it happens there first is if we don't know what we're doing, if we don't know where we're going, then it makes a lot of sense why we're not getting what we're needing. So there's definitely a lot more that I can share on like what I think contributes towards a really great one-on-one. I don't want to go on a full-on tangent. But I think okay, where do people go wrong? It's because they just don't know what it looks like to do it right.
Yeah, not proper training. And I feel like that's a common theme in the sales world in general of like, we're in one of those professions where like you technically can't really go to school to become a salesperson, or I haven't met very many people that go to school studying sales. So it's like one of those things where I feel like we get, depending on where you're working or how much time you take to invest in yourself in certain scenarios, it's like we have some of the least amount of training that like is forced on us, I guess is a good way to put it. So I guess in your example, like as a manager, and you gave us that really, really great stat, like how did you get better at one-on-ones or find direction or that direction that you should have in your career?
Yeah, a lot of failure. I think it's probably the best way to say it. There was definitely it's like with every really great story, right? Like you're living in the status quo world and there's something that introduces just enough conflict where you're gonna have to change and you go through this kind of story of transformation. So I think I had reached this point of conflict where it's real I think it's really easy to hide as a the and I say this with love. I think it's really easy to hide as a unskilled manager when
Mhm.
performance is really well because there's no forcing function to get better as a manager because look, I have this performance, right?
Yeah.
What ends up happening is when you get into positions where things are not going right, that's really where your lack of skills are exposed the most. And so like that happened to me where I was like, okay, this environment that I'm in, the situation that I'm in is beyond what I'm capable like whatever got me here is not going to get me through this. So when I
Mm.
had that moment, I really started to go and seek out like direction. And so I followed Kevin Dorsey. I signed up for his Patreon. I gobbled up all his content. Like I think he had something, it wasn't Restream, but it was something like that where you can like
Mhm.
go back and see all the things on demand and like
Yeah.
yeah, I would like take screenshots and I would take notes and I just really tried my best to better understand like what are all the different inputs that inform how I show like how I can be successful as a manager. And it's not just looking at your dashboards, but it's really being able to as Katie would say, like diagnose issues. So and then
Mm.
know exactly if I see this, here's what's going on. Here are the three things that I can do beyond that. So as I was learning, like, what are the things that are influencing my reps performance? Let me document that down and to the point that I'm kind of creating a playbook for myself. So I think that's the
Wow.
first part is you really have to take a critical eye from a data lens within your business. If
Mm.
you don't know how to do that, go seek out mentorship. So like luckily I was on a team of like 8 or 9 managers. One of them was an absolute data wizard. And so,
Awesome.
I was like, she mentored me on here's how I look at the performance of my team and here's how I identify the outliers and here's exactly how I dig in a little bit further and here's what this means for the calls that I listen to, the emails that I look out for, what I ask of my reps as well. So I think you have to have that data practice first, because if you don't, then you're never really going to know exactly where to start and where to end and how you know your rep is getting better. So
Mm.
like that was the one big piece. I think a second part of this is also like getting really good at providing feedback. The hardest
Mm.
part that I found in providing feedback wasn't the saying the feedback like, "Hey Maggie, here's what I'm seeing." It was getting over this like mental block that I had of I don't want to be an asshole and like traumatize
Yeah.
somebody. 'Cause I think I'd only
Mhm.
seen examples of, hey, you're doing a great job or you're a complete failure. Like there was nothing in between. So I had to
Mhm.
get good at understanding like one, the importance of giving feedback, how it's interlinked with like driving a higher standard and providing feedback to your people is also caring for your people. So you're not being an asshole. You'd be an
Yeah.
asshole withheld that. So I had to do that mental work and break down some beliefs that I had around that and then get really, really good at, and this is again, all informed by the data of going, hey, here's what I'm seeing in the data. Here's a couple examples
Mm.
that validate what I'm seeing. Like, I want to ask you, what are you seeing? And then hey, like, here's what really great would look like. And let's create a plan together to get
Mm.
there. So if I'm not actively kind of coming up and sharing that with someone, um, then I'm not doing what I need to do with them. Right. So like
Yeah.
that's how I would hold there's definitely nuances to this of like making sure that your reps are actually people who want to hear that, who want to
Mhm.
receive that, and who are willing to act on the feedback. But I think if you're, I think like that is the biggest piece is like the data, getting really good and really comfortable at providing specific, actionable, and timely feedback.
Yeah, and you got so meticulous about it. Like you said, you were going through Katie's courses, and I think sometimes whoever is listening out there, when you're trying to learn something, I try to like look at 7 different creators and I'm like, okay, great. I'm just going to get so fogged up with information that I just need to follow one person who's maybe been in this position before, who I like their style, everything like that. So I just love how you kind of went deep on that information. And then, like you said, you had those mentors around you where you were working and someone who was really good at data. And I think when you actually said it out loud, data and feedback, it's like it can be 100 times easier to give feedback when you actually have the data to back it up instead of a manager who sits there and says like, I don't think you should use the word like, which I know is, a problem that some of us reps have, but it's like, okay, well, I think Gong came out with data or a certain company came out with data that it's actually not ruining your deals. So it's like there's certain things that if you have the data to back it up, you're coming to that conversation with better feedback than just, hey, I wouldn't have done it that way.
Yeah, it's so thinking about the book Radical Candor, so Kim Scott, she worked for Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, I think. And there's this story that so she provides or shares in the book, which is she gives a presentation, and then after the presentation, she's walking with Sheryl, and Cheryl's kind of like, oh, trying to give her, like hints that there's opportunities for her to do better, and Kim wasn't getting it. And so Sheryl just goes, you're sharing so many amazing and smart things, and the frequency that shows up starts to decrease your credibility. So I think it's all about how you deliver the feedback and like what is the actual impact. So depending on the person, if they're saying like so many times that it becomes like I'm listening to it and I'm going, so I say like, I say I have a lot of filler words.
Me too.
So that's the first part. I think within reason. So if Maggie, you have an opener to a cold call and you're saying so many times, and then the call doesn't go the way that you want it to, and then I see that shows up 3 or 4 times, I'm not going to say, hey Maggie, like stop saying I might go more so, hey Maggie, what I'm starting to notice is that the calls seem to be going out of, like they're going in a direction I don't think that you want them to go. I'm also noticing that at the beginning of your opener, it seems like you're not really sure exactly what to say. Right. And your filler words are the ones that maybe make me lead me to this conclusion. It seems like you have an opportunity to take a lot more control, and probably what would happen, like maybe this is something around feeling confident in what you're saying. How do you what do you think?
Wow.
So it's not so much like just stop it. It's just more so, I think, providing context behind the feedback. So it's not just me saying something just to say something. It's more like, I just wonder, I have this theory. I don't know for sure, but what do you think? And would you be open to testing some things out and seeing if and how it impacts your business?
Wow.
Right, so that's a good example that I had last week, right? Which was, I'm seeing these calls are going way left, and it seems like you're giving up really easy, and it doesn't seem like you feel super comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable, your prospect's not going to feel comfortable. So here's maybe some things that we can do is your opener should be automatic.
Yeah.
You still have ums and likes, but I just want your opener to be chef's kiss.
Yeah. Yeah. The confidence of that opener and, going into that conversation, knowing exactly what you want to say, because that unsure vibe isn't going to be the best if someone's answering that way. But yeah. And I love that it's going a layer deeper than just, okay, let me give this surface level feedback. But you're kind of giving it back to them. You're coming with a hypothesis to it. And you're thinking about the whole big picture, not just this one little part of, a cold call or a discovery call or something like that. So we talked about data, having really good data and looking at it, obviously, not just having it, but actually using it and then, getting better and feeling better about giving that feedback. It's kind of like the overlying way of getting better at one-on-ones. Could you give us a breakdown of what a typical successful one-on-one should look like?
So yes, I'll share this with you. And then a lot of this is influenced by Kevin Dorsey as well. Like everything that I learned from him, and he's a mentor of mine too, which is amazing. So I do 2 one-on-ones per week with each rep on my team, 30 minutes for each one-on-one. So the first one-on-one is where we're reviewing numbers. So it's more about like, how are you pacing for whatever our cycle of time is? So like, how are you pacing for the quarter? What are the things that are most impacting your pacing? So what's working really well for you and what's maybe holding your business back? So once we have that, the next step is then to go through and look at, now we've got this big quarterly number and there's certain goals that you need to hit to get there. Let's break it down into bite-sized chunks. What do you absolutely need to do this week? And then the third part of it is then, all right, now walk me through how you're going to accomplish your goals. Right. So we'll go through that. And again, we kind of identified a couple of things of what's working really well for you and then what's holding your business back. So when we're looking at your goals, it might be something like, okay, where do you need to double down on to hit your goals? Wonderful. And then also, what is something that we should be working on that will pay off? Right. So like, there's something that's holding your business back. What's one thing we can work on during our second one-on-one of the week, which is all about coaching and skill development. So I think so in terms of the first one-on-one, success looks like, number one, you've enabled your reps on how to prepare for that information. And like, I have a formula spreadsheet thing. And so people just input numbers and it spits out the information, right? So that should be straightforward enough to do. So the thing successful is everyone is prepped, ready to go, and they understand the expectations of what the one-on-one is. And so there's no like confusion. We're able to maximize the time and we're able to accomplish our agenda. So that's like the first part. I think the second part of it is also identifying what's one thing that they can continue to drill down on, and then what's one thing that you want to focus in on for the coaching and skill development piece. Right. Of course, you want to do things like, check in on your reps and ask them like, hey, is there anything top of mind for you? Those kinds of things. But like, that's how I really like to run those first one-on-ones. I also like to assign some homework, which is like, okay, we're going to focus in on this one skill. So for example, hey, if I'm starting to notice, hey, you're having conversations, but they're not converting over into next steps. So like, that is the big blocker here. Please bring in, or I might ask, like, hey, like, what do you think is getting in the way? So that my person go, I'm really struggling with my opener. I'm really struggling with this, whatever. Okay, I want you to send me 3 calls. Assuming you have call recording, bring me in 3 calls where that shows up, where you had a conversation, it didn't close. I want you to come in with a point of view as to like, what's going on here. And then we'll review a couple, and then we'll also role play, right? In that second one-on-one of the week, right? So I think that the success of the second one, again, is clear expectations. You're focusing on one thing. The rep is coming in prepared, right, to share what's going on. And we're able to accomplish some role play until both myself and my rep feel really confident that like, hey, we've got a really good plan going into next week. So
amazing.
That to me is like success. So it's not just the manager here. So like the rep has to be prepared. It's a two-way street. The rep has to be prepared as well. So the manager's role on this one is, you need to, as a manager, need to make sure that you understand how to look at this information. You need to be prepared, because if you come into my one-on-one and you're not prepared, that's on you.
Yeah. I think my favorite thing about your whole process, and something where, we talked about, we probably both have had bad examples in the past of maybe walking into one-on-ones. I'm sure every single rep has. And like we said, there's no blame on either side, but that you actually create kind of like these miniature goals for them of like, hey, this is your quarterly goal. What are these things that we can do this week, and break it down? Because I think that's sometimes the really hard part about being a salesperson is there's this huge number you're working towards, and you're working remote now. You don't have your team sitting next to you. Like, it can be so isolating. At least that has felt that way for me in the past, where I'm like, is anyone keeping track of what I'm doing? Like, if I have a bad week, are people noticing? Like, is there a way that they would be able to help me? So I love how all of yours is, really formed around that, which just shows, your investment as a manager, but also you're getting that buy-in from them as well. It's like, hey, we talked about your goals week over week. This is, how we broke it down. And then you did the coaching in a totally separate call instead of just trying to cram everything together in about 30 minutes.
I don't have the attention span for it. I don't. It's also hard. I think it's hard. It can be hard to digest the information if there's so many things like you talk about, like there's a lot of conversations about, the ineffectiveness of context switching. And so that can also carry that applies to one-on-ones. So we're going from how are you doing to numbers review to what are your goals to like let's coach you to I personally you got my attention for about 15 minutes before my brain just goes somewhere else. So when I'm trying to find ways of like just making it very specific so it's really easy to know exactly what's going on, what next steps are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I like to keep my podcasts around 20, 25 minutes because I think we're all like that. We're, when we have calls with leads and things like that, it's like we have so much focus, attention, and we're showing up 100% on those calls that, sometimes when you're just meeting with your manager and it's a bit more casual, everyone kind of loses attention during it. So with that being said and kind of finishing up here, I'm generally curious about this because I kind of feel like it's a hot take of I hear some managers like do pipeline reviews, then they do one-on-ones, or they combine pipeline reviews and one-on-ones in the same meetings. Like, what are your thoughts around pipeline review meetings?
Yeah. So take into consideration my role within the revenue organization for sales development. So in terms of like pipeline reviews, I'm not going to be in those very often. I have exposure from this small amount of time that I was in an AE position, but however, I can use, I think like pipeline reviews. Again, it all depends on how, I think it all depends on how you use them and what's the intention of them. So for example, as an SDR manager, there are certain things that I want to do within my one-on-ones. But there's also things that other areas that I can look at in a team setting. And I think everything has to be driven towards what are your like kind of values that you think if you and your team espouse these values and demonstrate these values and it's embedded into everything you do, that is what's going to drive the kind of performance that you want to see. So,
okay.
So from my side, the things that I'm thinking about are, all right, there's the, of course, being data informed, there's being one team minded, and there's also, I think like I haven't figured out an easy way to say this other than the word like, being authentic. I just don't like that word. But I think it's like really considering the wholeness of a person. So
okay.
that's my trifecta of leadership. So when I think about being one team minded, it's like, hey, we're supporting each other. We're not competing against each other in the sense of cutthroat, but it's more about, all right, if you and I, Maggie, we're on the same team and I want to be the number one rep and you're the number one rep, and I'm going to go, cool, I want to understand what Maggie is doing that's making her number one, right? So that I'm going to compete to get better. And then you're going to go, but wait a minute, I want to be number one. I want to know what GB's doing. So like what ends up happening is we both get better all the way.
Yeah.
Performance gets better too. So as a manager, I want to create spaces where people can start to understand, cool, Maggie's the number one rep. What is it that Maggie is doing very specifically that other people can learn from and start to implement? So the one-on-ones that you and I would have, it would be, all right, Maggie, you've been able to be successful. Here are your strengths. You might walk me through your process as well. And I know because I'm having one-on-ones with other people, well, they're not doing that. And actually, Maggie, I think that what you have to share is incredibly valuable for the rest of the team. So it might be within a pipeline review meeting, for example, hey, Maggie, I've seen that you are able to convert at this stage this much higher than the team average. Walk us through what you're doing exactly. So that's what I think about of, all right, there's these values that I want the team to espouse. I'm trying to figure out how do I bake that into how I run my team. Now, there are people who value lambasting their people and completely berating them. And so they'll use pipeline reviews as a flogging experience, right?
Yeah.
So I think, again, so you have it all, I think it all first starts off with, like, what are your values? What are the values that you want to espouse that will, again, drive the kind of performance that you want to drive? How do you bake that into not just your one-on-ones, but your team meetings as well? And then, so then from there, it's like in your one-on-ones as a manager, you're really starting to understand what are people's strengths. You're also understanding what are their areas of development. And so within your team meetings, you're giving the people the opportunities to shine in their strengths while giving everybody else the opportunity to learn what can they do, right? And then maybe there's sometimes that's like, hey, listen, we need to implement some kind of change. And I don't know that everyone's going to be bought into it, right? So I'm like, I'll use those team meetings to go, hey, here's this problem that needs to be solved. I already know how it might be, how it might go, but I want to ask questions like sales. Like I want to ask questions to get people to share out an answer so that when I say, hey, here's what we're going to do, they're going to go, oh, I offered up that idea as a GUB, right? And they're more bought into it, even if we knew exactly what was going to happen before all of that. And so I think that's like that's how I realize I'm not answering a question directly, like, hey, what do you think about pipeline reviews? Again, it's all based on what are the values, how does like your how do your processes and your team meetings align to those values, right? And then how can you take the one-on-one time that you have with your reps to maximize that time that you have in your team meetings, right? And again, all alignment with the values that you have.
Yeah. And in your process, it comes full circle, which I love seeing managers do this with their reps of, okay, you took the top rep on your team, you're reviewing what they do, how they handle calls, and seeing, as a whole org, like, or the whole sales, department that you manage, like, where can Maggie come in and help the team? Because that's going to be full circle development for that rep of maybe one day wanting to become a manager and being able to, explain their processes or be bought in a certain way. And also it's, they're not just sitting in that seat performing really well, but they're sharing that information with others so that in hopes maybe one day they want to be a leader. And that comes a bit more naturally to them too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, GB, thank you so much for coming on here. Super excited about your newsletter. Can't believe it's already gotten past 7,000 followers. Yeah,
no, it is. I looked
subscribers. Yeah.
I'm almost, yeah, I got an email yesterday. I'm almost at 8,000. So I got like 1,000 more subscribers in the past week. It was awesome.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. I love to see it. You're helping managers out there get better every single day. And like you said, learning from your own experiences, other leaders that you follow out there. But thank you so much for speaking to our crowd today. GP, where can people learn more about you and learn more about your newsletter?
Yes. So I have a LinkedIn page, Gabrielle GB Blackwell, and they'll like under the tagline, you can sign up or subscribe to the one-on-one. So that's all you need to do is subscribe there. I started a Twitter, but I don't know what I'm doing on there. So not just subscribe to the newsletter.
We'll be there. We'll be there. You gave us one easy place to go. So everyone go follow Gabrielle on LinkedIn. You'll be able to find her newsletter there. But thank you so much for coming on here, GB.
Thank you, Maggie.
All right. Bye, everyone.